Welcome back to the Damn Good Dogcast. This is your host, Robert Reynolds. What a show we've got today. We are bringing in Stacey from the Tide Talk podcast, talking Bama football and the college football playoff expansion. We're going to have a discussion about that. Stacey, before we jump in, I'd like to welcome you on the show and tell people, more about the podcast that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you having me on. Excited to do this with you. Yeah, we have a podcast there just kind of dedicated to Alabama, much like you are dedicated to Georgia, just our favorite team. And we love talking about, Alabama athletics and most importantly, the football team and talking about all the championships that they've won over the last few years under Coach Nick Saban. So it's an exciting time to host an Alabama podcast, that's for sure.
I absolutely agree. Obviously, with the preseason, it's still way too early. People were hyped up, just obviously around the corner with recruiting and things like that. But let's talk a brief rundown because I think it's going to get pretty juicy talking about college football playoffs.
Right.
How did Bama, what you saw in regards to, to Bama's situation in the spring? You lose Waddle, you lose Devontae Smith, Najee, all those guys. How are those positions looking to be filled? Like, is everything going smooth, you would say?
Yeah, I would say I was actually on a Miami Hurricane podcast last week, kind of doing, that's how they played the first game of the year, kind of talking a little bit about the team. And right now, I would say, obviously, losing Devontae Smith, Jalen Waddle at wide receiver, those are two big-time playmakers, taken there early in the first round. Quarterback taken number 15 overall. Running back taken number 24 overall. Alex Leatherwood was taken there in the first round. So a lot of talent there on the offense has been, is gone now. So obviously Bryce Young is now going to be stepping in at quarterback. He looked pretty solid there during the scrimmage, the few scrimmages and the 8A game there during spring. The offensive line is probably what I would say is most concerning. And of course, when you recruit the way Alabama and Georgia do, when you say concerning, it's really not the same as other programs. The talent is there, but on the offensive line, and this, it's all about continuity and chemistry. Alabama is losing Alex Leatherwood, Deontay Brown, and Landon Dickerson off that offensive line that won the Joe Moore Award. So a lot of talent is gone, a lot of experience is gone. So getting that offensive line situated out when we get to fall, that's going to be the one thing I'm really looking at the most. And of course, replacing Devontae Smith and Jalen Waddle out wide. We have John Mechie back, who had nearly 1,000 yards last year as kind of that third option. Jaleel Billingsley is back as the tight end, kind of a hybrid wide receiver type guy at 6'4", 230. Cameron Latou is a guy that I would look out for. He's another tight end there. Who could really make with Bryce Young, probably going to see more of a style of offense like we had with Tua with the RPO and quick game. Mm-hmm. And Cameron Latou could make some plays across the middle of the field. So really excited to see the talent that Alabama has. And, of course, it's just about putting it all together. And you can have all the talent in the world, but if you're not a team and you don't have great continuity, it really don't matter.
Yeah, absolutely. I think with, Bama, everybody understands the situation. It's a system. And there really seems to be no stopping it. Like you can replace, coordinators. You can replace tons of talent on the offensive side of the ball, defensive side of the ball, and you never miss a beat. And I think that's one of the things that Bama has over basically everybody else. I think there's maybe you look at Clemson, and Clemson even struggled. Obviously the teams that are national title contenders, honestly, I hate to say it, but I think that's what separates Bama from the rest. But it's definitely going to be interesting to see how the spring comes around, the season comes around, I should say, and see how Bryce Young develops, right? Like I think, right. You look at Mac Jones, you look at Jalen Hurts, you look at Tua, Tua came in right away and had success and, lasted. But Mac Jones kind of sat back and waited, and it worked out. So you kind of see both ends of the spectrum, but still producing the same amount of success. And that's something that I think a true national title contender has to have. And, kind of to compare here, obviously Georgia and Bama are always going to compare for whatever reason. But, I look at the situation where, at least according to our spring day, and you never take away too much from a spring day, but you see some consistency in the quarterback position. Previous years, when we had Fromm, who was behind him, right? That was one of our biggest questions. And if he got hurt, I would have believed that our season would have been doomed like immediately. And last year we didn't have JT for the most of the year. So you had that inconsistency at quarterback, and and it kind of showed, right? Like you look at the Bama game last year with Stetson, and he did well in the first half, but he just couldn't complete the whole game, and he
Right.
kind of fell apart there. So finding that consistency, and I think you'll understand this as well easily. Consistency at the quarterback position can literally get you a national title. And I
Right.
think if you're a Georgia fan listening, I think this year with JT being as competent as he is, I should say, I think this is a really good shot here. But obviously, it goes through Atlanta, and I have a feeling that more likely it's going to go through you and Alabama again.
Yeah, and to me, this is just kind of an outsider looking in. This is Georgia's year. If to me, if Kirby Smart's going to get him one in Georgia, it's going to be this year. Like you said, JT Daniels, an experienced quarterback, a guy that's super talented, plenty of weapons there on the offensive side of the ball. And, of course, the Georgia defense is going to be one of the tops in the country. So Georgia has the makings of a national championship contender. It's just about getting over that hump. And winning a championship is hard. And I know that, some Alabama fans can take it lightly, all the championships they won. It's not easy. It's not easy to win a championship, and the fact that they've been able to do that, with Saban there, was it 6 times in 14 years, just incredible. It's so hard to win a championship and get over that hump. And at first Florida and Urban Meyer was that obstacle for Nick Saban, and right now Nick Saban is kind of that obstacle for Kirby Smart. And one day he could get over that obstacle, and obviously one day Saban's going to lose to an assistant coach. And if I had to put money on it, it would be Kirby Smart.
Yeah, I don't really think I don't see really any competition in regards to an assistant beating them. I think Kirby has the best shot, like you said, as
Right.
well. It's just a matter of and you look back at the previous games, right? And we'll do this quick, and then we'll get into the juicy part. I can't wait for
Okay.
this, but you look back at the national title game, you look back at the SEC championship game, 2018. The thing about it is, and I was having conversations with different folks too. Georgia needs to keep their foot on the gas.
Yeah.
And if Georgia can show that they can keep their foot on the gas and keep scoring points and don't play conservatively, Georgia will, I think, then project to the next level of potentially winning a national title. And you look at the national title. Look, there were some questionable calls, and I mean like 4th and 11 fake punt. The Tyler Simmons thing that still gets debated between Georgia fans. He was on sides. Whatever the case may be, what happens happened. But if Georgia can sit there and do the right things, right, I think you keep your foot on the gas. There's no question about it. Georgia has the potential to win a national title. And look, it's been 1980, and you hear it all the time. And I get it. Georgia fans are beyond ready to win a title, and with the talent that we have, I think it's rightfully deserved.
Yeah.
This situation, you got to earn it. Obviously, it's not easy. You've said that. And Georgia has tasted that right there, but it got taken away. So, obviously looking forward to this year, seeing what happens. I think Georgia's had the most stacked lineup that I've seen roster-wise in quite some time. Receiver depth, tight ends with Darnell Washington. Running backs is
Right.
always loaded, and that's not a question. Again, obviously you have some questions along the secondary, which, Turnage we just got from
Yeah.
Bama.
Hey, he's
So
a really good player. I hated to see him go, but he's a really good player.
Yeah, no, I was looking at his tape. Obviously, there was not a lot of experience in tape
Right.
from Bama, but looking into him when he was in high school and things like that, you can kind of see why he was All American.
Mhm.
Long, fast, things like that. Kind of prototypical Kirby Smart secondary, and really the main thing is smart.
Mhm.
You look at that, and Kirby knows what he wants with the DBs. Kirby was one himself, so I think he understands what he needs in the system for the cornerbacks and safeties. And with the addition of Tyke Smith from West Virginia for us as well, you might not have the experience. Well, Tyke brings it, but you've got tons of talent, and basically the intelligence, right? I think that's a key too. But experience goes a long way, and we're about to find out September 4th
Right.
what Clemson can bring to us, because Justin
Right.
Ross and company, as you know, can cause some problems.
Absolutely. I cannot wait for that game. How about that opening weekend?
It is
It
intense, man. Holy shit, it
is
is.
crazy. I'm
Because
looking forward to that.
that same day you play in Atlanta and
Right,
take on
Miami.
Miami.
Yeah.
And
So
one
it's
of the
going to be a lot of
questions
fun.
there, one of the
Yeah, I
questions
know.
I
That'd
have
be
there
great.
is De'Aaron King. I think depending on how he comes back,
Right.
if he's there for the game, I think that becomes an interesting game.
Right.
If
I agree with
De'Aaron
you.
is not able to play, I think it's going to get ugly. If I think De'Aaron King for Miami is that much of an is that important
Well,
because if he,
he's a difference maker for sure,
oh,
and I
absolutely,
like I mentioned, I was on a Miami Hurricane podcast last week, and that's what we talked about. I said with De'Aaron King, it's a totally different game. You know, if he plays, it's a totally different game than if he doesn't play. And I expect that game, if he plays, it'll go till middle to the late third quarter before Alabama starts pulling away. You know, like they normally do against opponents, and I can see that being a pretty tough game for Alabama out the gate, especially the offensive line situation. I don't know if you remember a couple of years ago when they played Duke there in Atlanta to start the
yeah,
season. It was
yeah.
much like what this year is going to be like, breaking in a few new offensive linemen, a few new guys around the offense, and it took a couple games to get their feet underneath them and get some consistency and some continuity built up. But once they got it built up, they played great. But that first game is a little tricky. It's a little bit different.
Yeah, no, looking back at Duke, that was a blowout waiting to happen. I knew that was coming, but I think you obviously, we'll transition into this. The first week of the regular season, right? Georgia Clemson, that's a playoff game in itself, and
Right.
then you sit there and you look at Bama versus Miami. Now, I don't believe Miami is going to be a title contender. Do I think they're top 25? Yes, but you're looking at it right here, though. You're prepping for big games and ready for the playoffs. And for us, we don't have the biggest schedule, right? Like we don't have the hardest schedule this year. We have Clemson to start, which if we can win Clemson, I think we're almost a lock, in my opinion,
Right.
unless just something crazy and drastic happens. But you look at the situation leading into the playoffs, SEC championship game. If we lose come September 4th, it's a do or die, as always. What's been
Mm-hmm.
like for us in the SEC championship game. So kind of obviously transition into the playoffs here. I'm making my prediction, and I'll do it officially later. But I have a feeling that Georgia will make the playoffs.
Okay.
Depending on if it's a 2 seed or 1 seed or 4 seed, I don't really care. I'm just going to make the prediction now, unofficially, that we will. But
Yeah.
and that kind of talks into what we're coming to talk about. The main thing here, and that's college football playoffs, and the obviously the talk about expansion.
Yeah.
And I know I'm an advocate for I think that we should expand, and there's several reasons, and I think we can talk about them. And I know, if I'm not mistaken, you're the one that wants to keep it the same way. So this is
Right.
where it gets interesting. So from my standpoint, I want to hear why you think the college football playoffs should not expand.
Well, and to even kind of go, I would be in favor of actually going back to like the BCS system, or even kind of like we talked off air, using the BCS formula to pick the 4 teams that are in the playoff. I would be okay with that. But the biggest reason that I would be wanting to keep it the way it is well, there's 2 main points. Is how many games are we really wanting these kids to play?
Yeah,
We're gonna, if we're gonna expand the playoff, we're gonna have to cut back on the regular season. We can't expect these college students to play more than 15 games in a year, and if that means cutting, they're not going to cut out the SEC championship game. That's a huge moneymaker right there. So
yeah,
they're going to have to. There's a lot of ins and outs that has to be fixed. But one point I want to make is, how many games do we want these college kids to play? And another thing is on any given year, how many teams do you legitimately think are national championship worthy? And what I mean by that is, like, all right, going into this season, how many teams do you think, if you had to list teams, you could say, yeah, they could win the championship? On any given year, I don't see that being more than 2 or 3. I mean, if you're being completely honest. So I'm afraid we're going to water it down. It's still going to be a great game because it's college football. I mean,
absolutely.
I'm not worried about the it ruining college football. I don't think that's what it is. I'm worried about how are we going to adjust the number of games that these kids are playing, and why are we concerned with rewarding teams that are really not championship worthy to begin with?
I see your point because I think you look at last year, right? Now, obviously, 2020 was just a weird fucking year. It really was.
Yeah.
But you look at the you had Oklahoma that could have been. I think at the end of the year, Oklahoma was a team that you didn't want to see.
Sure.
So you had Oklahoma covering the Big 12, and then obviously the SEC, Big 10 with and ACC. ACC, I've always gotten the rap that I just don't believe they're the toughest conference by any means.
Mm-hmm.
But Clemson, until you beat them, you know what I mean? Like, it is what it is. Yeah. So, you look at the situation of, obviously where it stands now, the four teams. And typically those are, Bama, Ohio State, Clemson. So basically you have every other school fighting for that one playoff spot. Mm-hmm. So I think what happens is, you see the same three teams, right? And at the end of the day, I understand you have to beat those teams to get in. So I understand that. But I think what's happening is you're not careful. You're cutting off, especially when it comes playoff time. You're cutting off, viewership in all the regions because let's be honest, it's generally located in the Southeast.
Yeah.
Clemson, Bama, Georgia's in there. Obviously Ohio State being up north a little bit, and then Oklahoma's in the south, but in the middle, in the center of the country. Mm-hmm. So for the most part, when you see Bama, Georgia, you see Bama, Clemson, Ohio State, it's generally like centralized down in the Southeast. So your fans out west don't give a shit.
Yeah.
Fans up north and in the Southwest don't give a shit. So they're not going to view it. And I think that's what happened last year with this past season, I should say. The viewership dropped substantially. Right. Obviously, whether you can contribute no fans in the stands kind of taken away from the atmosphere or, just you would think that people would want to tune in anyway, but that didn't happen in the viewership drop. And I think that's because if you're not careful, it's becoming stale. To your point, I know you're talking about, who deserves it. But, there were some situations here where, you had UCF, right? UCF sat there and they, went undefeated, but they basically got set down and, no, you're not worthy of it. So, you look at that. But taking into context here, you hear these systems talking about, just to expand to 8, where your Power 5 conference championships, your champions get, those 5 spots. Then you get the highest ranked group of 5, right, for 6 spot, and then 2 at large. So you hear that, right? And one of the things that, you can look at it in a sense of, maybe the Pac-12 isn't ready to win a title, right? Nobody's close. But we know this. They're money hungry as hell. So you look at that and, you open up the, USC, right? Or Oregon. Let's just say Oregon because they're, in my opinion, the most relevant in the Pac-12.
Right.
You get Oregon's fan base involved. Then it becomes more, expanded in literal terms, right? Like throughout the country. So that's where I'm looking at it in that way right there. Now, you look at the group of 5 and, like Coastal Carolina was a shock last year. But Cincinnati in the bowl game against Georgia, that was one of the toughest games we played all year. Not even close. You had Bama, but you get what I'm saying. From a group of 5 school, we didn't know what to expect, and they showed out. Right. So you look at the defense; they had a very good defense. That team right there, I think, could have beat a Florida. They could have beat, I don't know about Oklahoma at the time, but they played damn good football. And it's kind of an interesting thing to see if you can include that group of 5, right? Situationally, I would say, because you sit there if a group of 5 school is ranked, out of the 25, then that's the highest one. Why put them in, right? So if you set like a standard, right? If a power or a group of 5 school is in the top 25, the highest ranked. But if no group of 5 for some reason is in the top 25, then you just go 3 at large. Something like that. Yeah, and I think it gives the smaller schools something to look forward to, like a Cincinnati, UCF, Coastal Carolina. Hell, Coastal Carolina looked good, especially against BYU, I know. But, you give those schools, the smaller schools, the spotlight a little bit. And I think it helps recruiting, and I love recruiting, and you probably know this too, but it helps recruiting, and you get more spotlight, and it brings parity, I guess, and from a standpoint of where like kid can go to Bama or he can go to hell, he can go to Cincinnati and it's like, hey, we're gonna make the playoffs, kind of thing.
Yeah,
I think that's what my standpoint is.
yeah. Well, let me. I'm gonna. Obviously, we're kind of we have a different views, which makes for good for good. A live stream. But how many starters was Georgia out against Cincinnati in that game?
There were several.
Yeah. See,
Some of it may have been injury too, but I mean,
right.
you did have several sitting out.
Yeah, that's. I mean, how close is that game if Georgia is full strength?
Are you talking about with
with
Cincinnati?
Cincinnati, right?
I don't know. In hindsight, that
No, and I'm not
has some
trying to take
questions
anything
on.
away from Cincinnati. They were obviously a very good football team.
They
But
wanted that game more. I think honestly.
and see that's kind of my point here. Georgia was without several key players. Obviously, Georgia was the only team that had everything to lose. I mean, Georgia had nothing to gain by beating Cincinnati. Cincinnati's the only team who had something to gain by winning that game. So they had all the motivation. And Georgia was still able to win that game despite, I mean, they were a little sloppy in the game, and a lot of that goes to Cincinnati, but Georgia still wins that game despite not being full strength, despite not really having the motivation that you would normally have in a game. So I don't want to water down our playoff system to let a team like Cincinnati in. And like I said, I'm not trying to take anything. They're a really good football team. Coastal Carolina was a really good football team, but are they a championship football team?
Fair enough. And one of the things that you were talking about here that kind of adds to my side of the debate in this theory is this. You look at these guys opting out, and you don't really see that with the playoff teams.
Right.
However, the teams that just miss out, and Georgia's been on this side of the situation too, where we finished, in Texas A&M this year, you finished fifth. You feel like you should have been in, and in that letdown, most of the kids will sit there and opt out. So you kind of see what happened with Florida. Right. The only, Florida was like that. They opted out. My thing is I'm just saying if you opt to expand to 8, I think you see less opt outs, especially with the teams that, that are in the playoffs. There's something there to play for that's a legitimate shot. So I think you see better quality football. It's just a matter of how
I agree with that. But then there's still around 30 other bowl games where players are still opting out, even if you.
But it's going to cut down that right there, I think, because I mean, let's be honest here. I would love to see less, no opt outs, right? Because that's where you get the full strength teams, you get better quality football.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at that, you kind of, you kind of create this gap. I would say where if you have 8 teams in the playoffs, those 8 teams more than likely those guys are going to stay if they can play, right? They're going to stay in. Now you might see teams that are outside of the top or out of the group of 8 there. But at the end of the day, who's to say that those teams, probably knew it was coming? Like, you see a 2-loss, like for instance, of a 2-loss Florida team, right? You sit there, there's no way to get to the SEC championship. Maybe that's probably understanding. You see it coming. Like if like Georgia, when we got 5th, we thought we were the 4th best team, and I thought so. And when we weren't, there was that emotional aggravation. And I think and when we played Baylor, we got our asses handed to because so many guys opted out and there was nothing to play for. Right. So, obviously you're going to have that situation where teams feel like they're better than that and they get left out. You're going to have that because, it's an inclusive group. But I think if you do the 8, you get better quality football up top. And I think that's what drives the money. Yeah,
for sure. But like I said, you're helping 4 other teams prevent opt-outs, and they're still – I mean, I'm not even sure how many bowl games we have now. It seems like 100
There's so damn many. I don't even know.
So, I mean, all those teams are still going to be affected by that. So now you're really you're preventing 4 other teams from not having opt-outs. So, so there's still going to be plenty of opt-outs around the country. So it's not going to fix the opt-out problem. You're now allowing teams like Cincinnati, who at their very best couldn't beat a Georgia team who was at their 75%. I mean, if we're being truthful, and a team that didn't have motivation.
Yeah, I see what you're saying there. I think the curious thing that makes me interested to see what happens if you have an expansion to the playoffs. it goes down to recruiting. So, for instance, Cincinnati, come in and should have won that game, but Georgia came back and win, right?
Mhm.
So, yes, you were talking about the 75% basically compared to their team and whatnot. So, you have that point. But what's to say if for Cincinnati was 8 seed, if I'm not, or they were 8 ranked. So what if they were in the playoffs, right? So they go to the playoffs, but obviously outside of the game, let's just focus on other things outside of that physical game.
Okay.
You open up better recruiting, and you open up the recruits, and you look at better recruiting. I think it would translate to that. I think the revenue generated from being in those games can allow facility expansions and things like that. What we're seeing with Bama and Georgia and Auburn. Auburn just decided to break ground on a facility opening in 2022. So you see the arms races in full effect. That's no question. But it gives these teams like a Cincinnati or, say if Coastal Carolina made it to the top 8 or whatever the case may have been, you give those schools a chance to somewhat catch up. But the recruits, you could see that where, the kids would go there because they see that, if we could sustain greatness and make it to the playoffs, show them why we're here. Obviously play that underdog effect. But I think if you raise the recruiting, then it becomes a situation where that team, even if they're in the 8th spot, right? Even if you're getting better quality football, and it might raise it up to the point where you could eventually become a title contender. And obviously with the transfer portal, you look at the transfer portal. The bigger schools, your Georgias, your Bamas, you're seeing this. Guys are opting, deciding to transfer a lot, and I think that's becoming your norm. You're going to see a lot of guys transferring out, especially to these bigger schools. They're going to drop down and go to other places. You look at those guys that can sit there and go. What if Turnage would have been like, I want to go to Cincinnati because they can make it to the playoffs. Then you're adding elite talent to these teams, and you're going to build that team up to make them more competitive. And ultimately, I think you kind of even that flat gap out. You kind of flatten that gap. If you see what I'm saying.
I think that is a good point. I think you would narrow the gap between some of these teams like Alabama compared to like Cincinnati, but kind of my final, I guess, thought on the whole expansion thing is how long? I mean, let's just go back 120 years since around 1900.
Okay.
Let's just think about when you think about national championship winning programs, you think about the same 5 to 10 programs. Everybody in the country thinks about the 5 to 10 different programs. You got your Alabama, Oklahoma, Notre Dame, Ohio State, Georgia, Michigan,
USC.
So it's
maybe Miami.
Maybe Miami. Yeah, you can include them.
Nebraska. You still hear Nebraska thrown around
right. So, but for the most part, all those teams are still in the hunt every year. For the most part.
Yeah, I mean, to some
degree. And we've had how many different ways have we found to crown a national championship? Yet here we are still talking about the same handful of teams every year.
I'll tell you what, though, and we talked offline about this, so I'm going to let everybody hear this. I'm telling you, I always was under the impression that the BCS system, while you only had 2 teams, it seemed that every BCS championship was a damn good game.
Yeah.
So
when did they get it wrong? When did they ever get it wrong?
That's the interesting thing. So I look at it this way. If I could make my own prediction or system, you can expand it to 8, right? You can expand it to 8. But instead of a committee,
right,
that you could really have some bias there.
Right.
Put the BCS system
bias.
into effect.
I mean, I don't even think it's intentional bias. I think it's unintentional bias. I mean,
you look at and I'm not bashing Alabama. I get this. But the year y'all won the title, when we were number 1 seed, y'all came in the 4. The thing about it is, and this is where you have this bias for these bigger schools. Bama, in my opinion, should have been at 5th or so, like that, leading into the selection. Obviously, hindsight, y'all did win, but you look at it, Bama didn't even play an SEC championship, but they got pushed over and into the 4th seed. So I'm not saying that y'all didn't deserve it. I'm just saying 2-loss Bama team made it into the 4th spot. No, it was a 1-loss, wasn't it?
1 loss. Lost to Auburn the very last game.
Yeah, y'all lost to Auburn, and then Auburn took over in the championship. That's right. So, a 1-loss Bama team, jumps in. So that was a situation where, Georgia would have loved to have that, 2018.
Yeah.
But you look at
Well,
that
yeah, but
situation.
see, and here's the thing with the expansion: Alabama would have been in the playoff. That if we had 8, they'd have been in there.
Oh, well, absolutely.
So I
But
mean, it's it, and this is kind of part of the what I'm the Alabama fan in me, and I try to look at every situation, as clear as I possibly can. But this is my Alabama side of it, and maybe this is just the arrogant Alabama fan.
yep.
It seems like everybody's trying to create a situation where it's harder for Alabama to win a championship. If you expand the playoff, you're just making it easier. They're always going to be in. I mean,
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, though. I look at the 8. You give it a shot, but you give it more. More shit can happen with 8
yeah,
teams, right? I look at this right here. You have your 4 seeds and then the bottom 4, right?
right.
So maybe you sit there and have your 5 versus your 8, 6, and 7. Then that team goes against the 3 or the 4, right? And then you kind of move it that way. Look at March Madness, or hell, just follow the FCS. Just
Right,
follow the FCS playoffs. The at least the template there.
right.
And how that impacts the season. I think maybe you move away from a cupcake game, and you take that game away.
Which
Push
I'm in
every.
favor. I'm in favor of that.
No, I mean the cupcake games are beneficial, right? It
Yeah,
helps provide, gets our depth like for these bigger programs. It gives us a chance to get our depth, playing time, and experience, and,
and it
and it
helps the other
honestly
program
gives
too.
the smaller schools a payday.
Right,
You
right.
know,
Yeah, big time.
so it's beneficial.
Right.
But if you're looking in the grand scheme of things, and I see this coming now, Georgia started this, Bama starting to do this. You're starting to see these huge marquee non out of conference games.
Mm-hmm.
Georgia did this with Ohio State. You've got Clemson again. You've got Oklahoma. You're seeing the huge marquee names getting brought up, and,
Right.
and I think that's the way that the season is coming. I think that's just what's going to have to happen. Teams are going to have better schedules to make it into the playoffs, and I think
Yeah.
with that, you look at a 2-loss team that's viable to make it into the playoffs based off of their strength of schedule, right? If
Right.
you bring in, I would tell you, I would love to see, Clemson and Georgia, and then hell, and Oklahoma, Georgia in the same year. That's insane, and that's
Yeah.
money being brought into these schools, especially if you do home and homes.
Right.
You look at a Bama and Texas, right? That's
Yep.
2 huge programs.
Right.
Huge programs. The
That series
revenue
starts
there
next
doing
year.
a home and home would be insane.
Hey, that starts next year. Next year, Alabama travels to Texas, and then the next year, Texas travels to
Yeah.
Tuscaloosa. So
So
that's
you look at those marquee matchups,
yeah,
and look at Notre Dame and Georgia. Now,
Mhm.
obviously, Georgia won both, but in 2019,
fantastic games. Both were fantastic
both were
football games.
fantastic. But the atmosphere,
Yes,
Brian Kelly said it himself that night in Athens. The stadium was so loud, and the fans had an actual impact on the game because
Right.
the intent, the stakes in that game. It
Right.
was so loud. Hell, you created penalties from the fans. The football team didn't even have to do anything. The fans helped them out.
yeah.
So you
Hey,
get that kind of environment. It's
right.
beautiful for college football.
Right. Hey, I'm all for those out of conference games.
I
I
am
would
too,
be I
man.
would be in favor. It's because I do believe the 18 playoff is coming. I just the
I
expansion is
think
going
it's
to
coming. It's just
happen
how you do it.
because money talks. I mean, that's just the fact. But what to me, I don't want to do the conference champion team gets an automatic bid. You realize last year, and I know last year was a COVID year, it's a weird year, but Oregon finished the season 4-3
Yep.
and was the Pac-12 champions.
They were 4-3, and I think they were 25th ranked.
Right. I mean, do we really want them in the playoff?
Well, and based off of that one year, you would look at it and say no.
Right.
But looking into the situation, I think with a full regular season game, what could have happened, right? I think it's
Right.
what could have, would have,
I
should
mean,
here.
we're playing some what ifs, obviously, because
Yeah.
we don't really have because last year was a different year, but I'm afraid that it would water the playoffs down just a little bit, and it could take away. Let's just use this as an example. Clemson and Georgia play the first game of the year. Let's say this year is the first year of the 18 playoff. All right. Let's say Georgia wins the first game of the year against Clemson. Clemson also loses, let's just say, one more game throughout the year. Georgia goes undefeated or maybe loses to Alabama. It doesn't matter.
Yep.
But Clemson gets that last spot in the college football playoff, and let's say Georgia's went undefeated, they get the number 1 seed. So now they're going to play each other again. We've already seen it. I
Well,
mean, like,
true. But things
I'm
can
just
happen though too. I
yeah. I
look at
mean,
it that way.
that could happen, especially with the way that these non-conference matchups are starting to line up throughout the country. I mean, Auburn's playing Penn State this year up in Happy Valley, so there's a lot of different matchups that are happening in the non-conference schedule, and we could get some repeats. Especially, I mean, if Clemson and Georgia are going to play in the regular season, there's a good chance if we expand to 8, they could play in the playoffs too.
And honestly, for you look at the financials of it. That's nonetheless it's a rivalry game. Clemson and Georgia rivalry game. So I would love to see it anyway. But
You're
the
right.
thing
Yeah,
about it is, for instance, Georgia Clemson play week 1, right? We play September 4th. The outcome of that game could be completely different given the
absolutely.
entirety of the season and
Mm-hmm.
meeting back in the playoffs.
Yep.
Obviously, the stakes are higher. There's a completely different seasons happen, so think you're going to see different situations. All circumstances are changed for the
Mm-hmm.
most part. Neutral sites, things like that. So what seems to be a replay, depending on the situation, could be a completely different thing. And to
Yeah.
your point with the schedules, Georgia alone, like I said it before, you got Clemson, Oklahoma, and you've got Ohio State. Right, that's just 3 of the programs that we've set up homes and games with. Those are all playoff games. Those are
Right.
all playoff games, and you're seeing them in the regular season. So who's to say you may see a replay, but you're
Right.
still going to have a good game because both teams should be elite. Now, depending on the situation, they're years ahead, years from now. But I'm expecting Georgia to stay relevant and elite. I think
Mm-hmm.
you have to, and I think Oklahoma's going to do the same thing.
Right.
The program branding is going to keep them relevant. Kids are going to want to go there because they get put in the NFL. The
Right.
reason why they go to Bama, why they go to Ohio State, receivers go to Ohio State, why linebackers go to Georgia, running backs go to Georgia. Shit like that is going to keep the teams relevant. But
Right.
you also look at these other teams, and you've got to step up. And smaller markets, I get it, it can be done. So, what you see could be a playoff, replays in the playoffs, but I still think you're getting a better football because most of the teams that are in there probably earned it.
Right.
And even if you lost, it's probably close enough to where, you should still be in there. So, I mean, you're going to have that kind of situation, I think. There's no question about it. But like I said, use the BCS system. The
Yeah.
BCS
I
system
would be in
never
favor of
gave us
that.
a bad game.
I agree with you. I agree with you. But what's funny is one of the reasons we went away from the BCS is because of the rematch that Alabama and LSU had in 2011.
We
And
can't say this though. We know this. We both know this. That year, Bama and LSU were the 2 best teams, and it wasn't even close.
right,
It
yeah,
was not even close.
right,
Just telling. Look at the damn NFL rosters now, and how many of those guys from those teams are still playing big time football.
right,
That
yeah,
just tells you that year it was deserved. It was
right,
merited that those teams played the hell. LSU won by a field goal.
yeah, 9 to
Now, y'all
6,
should have won because you missed several, but
right,
nonetheless, y'all got a kicker now, so that's
yeah,
good. But you look at that game; it was decided by a field goal in
right,
overtime.
right,
Then you go, and this is where the replay came in. A completely different ball game come the national title game. 21
mhm,
nothing. Didn't even get to Didn't even get over halfway on the half line, or halfway to the
midfield,
end zone. Didn't get on their side of the ball till after the halftime.
right,
It was a complete utter disaster for LSU. But at the time, those teams were literally sitting there heads above everybody else that
right,
year.
right,
That year, no question.
right. But and
So
that's what I'm
the
saying. Like
BCS
in
did
the
give us good games
right,
all the
yeah,
time.
I agree. I see, and I think you're right, and that's why I like that system. But it's funny that we're talking about expanding the system that that could give us more rematches when we're coming out of a system that we're currently in because we didn't want to have rematches
Well,
like we did in the 20.
look, man, human nature,
Right.
it's a revolving circle. It's going to happen. But
Yeah, and I'm okay with the expansion, but I do think we're going to have to, do something about the regular season. Maybe cut it down to 10 games if we're going to expand to 8 teams in the playoff, which I would be perfectly fine with if that's what they want to do. And that's what's going to happen. I do think they need to trim the regular season down just a bit.
I think you take away one regular season game. I think you keep your rivalry games because I
Right.
was listening and this I was listening to the J Boy show. I'm a shout out
Oh
here,
yeah,
J Boy show.
yeah.
He was talking with Josh Pate about this, and it's about the
Hmm.
same situation. And it was brought up about the Iron Bowl. If the ramifications for the kick six, right? The kick six, if it wouldn't have pushed Bama out of the playoffs, would it have mattered less? No, in my opinion, I don't think it was because the rivalry is so deep.
Yeah, it's not.
It still doesn't matter whether if you know what I mean. Like if Bama was still going to make the playoffs, it would not have mattered less or more. I think it would have been the same situation because the rivalry is so bad. But on that note, Stacey, I'm gonna have to let you go. But I saw
Yeah,
you're having some issues with your PC, so
yeah.
I don't want to keep you much longer. I know I don't want you to die off on me here. Before you go, sorry to cut you off. Before you go, let people know where they can find you, and yeah, just
Yeah,
go ahead and tell yourself where you can find them.
yeah. You can follow my personal Twitter at Blackwood89, and our podcast is at Tide Talk Pod. And you can find us on all the podcast platforms. We would appreciate a subscription and a listen, even if you are a Georgia fan. So I appreciate you having me on, man. It was a lot of fun. I can't wait to do it again.
Hey, man, it's always a pleasure having you on. Just I look forward to doing this again. I think with Bama and Georgia, it's almost a given that it's going to happen at some point. I think you have to. Just two huge schools going at it and just
Yeah.
talking, man. It's always fun. So,
Yes,
hey,
sir.
thanks for coming on.
Absolutely, man. You have a good one.
Hey, you too.
See you.
All right. All right, guys. Before we go, got a new tradition. And if you're on the video, you're about to see the start of a new tradition for the show. I've been waiting for this. I'm excited about it. But I'm going to show you the new tradition starting whenever this happens next. But the commitment chain, guys. Bringing on the commitment chain anytime we get a commitment. The next episode, this bad boy is going to be out in full effect, and we're going to talk about that commitment. So whether that be from the transfer portal, whether it be the actual commits, hey, we're going to talk about them, and we're going to have this chain on and rock in full effect. So that is the big reveal. I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to hype up myself. I love the commitment chain. It's nice. It feels good on you. It feels good. So looking at that right there, But for right now, guys, that's all we've got. I hope everybody enjoyed the content today. And on that note, though, guys, go Dogs, and I'll see you soon.